Today I've got something that I meant to get on record before Halloween, but Friday the 13th will do just as well. Um, just like many things, building a candy pipe stream for trick-or-treaters, a virtual costume party, and my Luciferian ritual to the Duke Nibirius. I meant to have this already done, but it's too late for many things. The election, technical difficulties, depression, and eating all the candy before Halloween even got here um, all got in the way of a good, productive Hallows Eve. Instead, I spent 3 days tearing apart and repairing PCs, waiting around for packages, and scrolling through news feeds, trying to find silver linings. I felt like I was living in my own cabin in the woods, dealing with a plethora of allegorical horrors, Deadites, Cenobites, and xenomorphs. Oh my! Uh, what a waste of a full moon Halloween. Shit only happens as often as Halley's Comet, as it seems. Horrible terrors and dreads aside, let's get into some simulated bugaboos. I'm calling this one the Necroverse, a Tommy Westfall level TV theory that is actually a little more believable than living in an autistic boy's snow globe. Instead, our worlds are a little more fun and connected by a book bound in human flesh, the Book of the Dead, the Necronomicon. Within the mythology, this grimoire or spell book is claimed to have been put together by the Sumerians, lost or collecting dust on a library shelf for a couple thousand years before being found by Al-Hazred, the mad Arab. In the Cthulhu mythos, at least, by horror pioneer and famed racist piece of shit H.P. Lovecraft. Then it was obscured for many decades before being found by Ash and the characters in the Evil Dead franchise. From there, it has become an icon to rival the likes of Jason and Michael Myers alike, though over the years our storytellers may have linked all these zombie slashers together. So let's get into the appearances and connections, both concrete and tenuous, of this tome over the modern age. So, the canonical appearances of the Necronomicon, as far as the horror world is concerned, we've got the H.P. Lovecraft works, of course. You've got the Evil Dead franchise. Jason Goes to Hell. I believe that's 8th in the Friday the 13th series. Pumpkinhead 2, which was surprising to me. I only saw the first one. Freddy versus Jason versus Ash, the comic books by Dynamite Publishing and its spin-offs. H.R. Geiger's visual art series, 1 through 5 of the coffee table books. Look into it. Let's get into the timeline of these connections, the complete timeline of the Necronomicon. So, anywhere from 4000 to 2500 BC, the Sumerians created many incantations and divinations in our canon here, created by the Dark Ones, some of their gods. At the beginning of civilization, that's where civilization started, was Sumer, the cradle of civilization there. And this period is known as the First Dynastic Period, the period of Mesopotamian divination. And then in 2700 BC, there had been trade routes established throughout this cradle I mentioned, Egypt, Damascus, what is now Syria. There were trade routes throughout there, so that's how somehow the book made it there as well, or at least a copy of it. Imhotep is mummified, and a spell from the Book of the Dead is placed on him, and that's in the mummy mythologies. So yeah, that's also a canonical appearance. I forgot I was going to save that till the end, but fuck it. The canonical appearances of the Book of the Dead also includes the mummy mythologies. So you got that. And then in 700 AD, this starts the canon established by H.P. Lovecraft throughout the Cthulhu mythos. 700 AD, the creation in Damascus of a copy of the Book of the Dead by, again, Al-Hazred, the Mad Arab, by adapting these ancient Sumerian spells and some of these Egyptian versions probably, and binding them together in a book of human flesh, which is a critical ingredient. The one in the mummy mythologies was also. And this version was known as the Kitab al-Azif. And that was established, and again, the short story, The History of the Necronomicon by H.P. Lovecraft. In 1000 A.D., a few hundred years later, collected by Theodorus Philetus of Constantinople, then translated into Greek. And then the Greek copy was known as the Necronomicon Ex Mortis. 1100 AD, just 100 years later, one of the Greek copies, thought to be the only Greek copy, was destroyed by Patriarch Michael. So, H.P. Lovecraft, he sort of did that thing of blending real-life history along with his fantasies. 1200s AD, a Latin translation of Azif is created and dispersed throughout Europe. And then in 1500 AD, an English translation was created by John Dee, and that was in the story of the Dunwich Horror. In the late 1800s, the original Latin copy was collected by author Robert W. Chambers, driving him mad and inspiring him to write the book of short stories, The King in Yellow. That is again in the history of the Necronomicon. So then, fast forward to the 1970s AD. A copy was collected by an unnamed cabin scientist in Michigan, and that was in The Evil Dead, which this revamped the whole Necronomicon mythology. These stories establish the horror's definitive copy of the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, and it seems to be an original medieval era Sumerian version of the Book of the Dead. It seems very closely related to that Azif copy I mentioned, which was Arabic, but again, that was Arabic. This was Sumerian. So whoever created this copy was trying to get very close to the original, and we see that pays off by this being an extremely powerful book. It's able to, it's got the power of necromancy. It can create zombified versions of living entities, humans, monsters, even trees, as we see in The Evil Dead. And these zombified versions of things, they're known as Deadites. That's established throughout the canon. It is also implied that the cabin once belonged to Freddy Krueger, as his weapon of choice is hanging up on the door by the door in the shed, if you look closely. And then in the 1980s, a copy of the Book of the Dead is used to resurrect Jason Voorhees, and possibly its magics are involved in the creation of numerous other movie monsters, as we'll get into it. And that was established in canon in Jason Goes to Hell again. And then in the 2000s, the book is recovered by Ash after an epic showdown between all three of the aforementioned characters and a group of feds trying to use the book in Operation Black Book. And that's in Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, that comic book. All right, so let's get into the implications and speculation of the appearances of the Necronomicon Ex Mortis. The biggest implication, if all these reportedly canonical appearances can be, verified as true by the community at large, there are multiple copies of this iconic grimoire, and it can be true, as the history of the Necronomicon states in the original H.P. Lovecraft stories, that there have been translations and copies printed over time. And it is it's a good explanation for why there may be aesthetic differences in these different franchises and different languages we see. The ingredients and abilities for these different tomes remain consistent. You know, it's a grimoire bound in human flesh containing spells of necromancy and demonic arts. Another component that doesn't really get elaborated upon, but it seems that there's been a soul trapped, soul of some sort of entity within it, perhaps boosting the enchantment, almost Elder Scrolls style. Perhaps it is the soul of the human that the pelt is made out of, that human flesh. Who knows? And that's part of the beauty of this icon, is that it's very mysterious. It's occultic, you know, and that speaks to the success of this MacGuffin. So, the first speculation in order I've got here for the Necroverse, as I'm calling it. Let's explore the larger horror universe. H.P. Lovecraft, for all of his faults, set the stage for numerous tropes, ideas, and stories that we see in media up to and including today. Lovecraft country aside, you got the Cthulhu mythos. You've got the New English setting. He really established a unique tone for things like haunted houses and ruins, Western occult black magic, the idea of monsters being these interdimensional or mutant alien creatures, shape-shifting. He pioneered the template of there being this gritty, realistic nature between science and magic. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have things like Stephen King, and we might still be stuck in the spoopy 19th century Gothic world of Edgar Allan Poe. Somehow that beautiful, hateful, autistic mind of Lovecraft created one of the most largest contributions to 20th century horror genre. Really revamped Gothic culture at that point. Fast forward another 50 years, and slasher movie flicks are on the rage, but the killers start to evolve beyond serial and into supernatural. With The Shape in the first Halloween flick, Michael Myers, the ever-pervasive slow-moving killer, hit the big screen, and another huge contribution to the horror genre was made. People like John Carpenter realized, we can blend special effects, masks, makeup, cool ethereal music scores, and big Hollywood budgets and make something really big out of these Hitchcockian killer flicks. And then you had people like Sam Raimi who said, we can go the other way and do something no one is doing. Take 3 sets, a modest budget, and some Night of the Living Dead level effects, add some camera tricks and stop motion, make something no one is seeing right now. It was an indie success. Their biggest MacGuffin was the Necronomicon. You know, Sam Raimi and his crew, they knew their shit. They knew their horror history. They were blending a few different assets that had been established in the industry along with some shit no one was doing. Made something wholly unique. 20 years later, crackpots like myself are like, we'll put it all together. Which brings me to our first item of soft speculation, Child's Play. Chucky. The main antagonist is a slasher who in the opening scene of the first movie uses this Sumerian, I think it's Sumerian at least, spell to trap his soul into the eponymous Chucky doll. It's Child's Play. This, I feel, was a clear implication of connection, if not the Necronomicon, then to the same forms of magic referenced to and inspiring the Demonata itself. If that's not enough footsie, and the bride of Chucky in one scene, they're in an evidence room, I think, or trophy room of some sort, and around them are the masks and paraphernalia from multiple other horror icons. One of the Shape's masks, one of Jason's masks, one of Freddy's gloves, Leatherface's chainsaw, canonically grouping all these into the same universe. These flicks I've seen online have already grouped together into the slasherverse, though the precedent hasn't been set yet to establish a Necroverse. Some other works that have attempted to concretely link the slasherverse of a larger horror universe are Behind the Mask, which I haven't seen, also known as The Rise of Leslie Vernon, also cameoing in Hatchet 2. And then, of course, there's The Cabin in the Woods, which features blatant references to every horror film, even in its central plot, them actually being sociological science experience, partially hallucinatory or psychometric, conducted by a shady organization of some sort. I've seen that movie. I just wasn't paying that much attention. These are much more on the side of fandom rather than Easter eggs or much less canonical references. These aside. Moving on, my next item of speculation, and this is something of a surprise, is Hocus Pocus. I know, it's not really horror. It's not a slasher. It's Disney. Still, someone on the crew had the idea to allude to the fact that the spell book, generically referred to as but at one point the first page reveals in English Manual of Spellcraft and Alchemy, but it is a grimoire in the same exact vein as the Necronomicon. It is bound in human flesh. It contains the soul of a being, and it also contains spells for necromancy. Of course, it doesn't look like the Ex Mortis, Azif, the Demonata, whatever, but it's established earlier that there are multiple copies. Maybe it's that English John Dee version I mentioned earlier. This one is, it doesn't resemble the ones in the horror flicks with that face or whatever, but it's necromancy. I mean, they couldn't say necromancy. It's Disney, but that was necromancy. They're raising demons and sacrificing versions and soul trapping and shit, so, it's the Necronomicon. At least one of the filmmakers on that classic cheese knew what they were doing. Next, I've got some gray canon here. As Skywalker established 20 years ago, there are tiers to canon. Movies at the top, of course. Live-action TV, close second. Cartoons next. People aren't really paying attention. Comic books, they gotta keep writing shit. It's not all going to line up. And lastly, novels, adaptations, and such. So that's the order of propriety. The legendary sequel to Freddy vs. Jason, known as Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, is a mid-2000s graphic series that was adapted from a proposed screenplay that would have canonically established this crossover between the slasher-verse and the Evil Dead, creating a Necroverse in action. Dynamite Comics goes on to have the book feature in plots of other series of theirs, including The Shadow and Xena. It's pretty interesting. I gotta check that out. They also smoothen out some of the canon of the pre-Abdul al-Hazred Sumerian history of the spell books. Good stuff that you can ramble to your friends about in a faded haze in the middle of a movie marathon. All right, and lastly, I teased it earlier, we've got the Egyptian Book of the Dead in the Mummy franchise. It's actually an even more ancient version of the Necronomicon. While not an outright incarnation, it would be a close cousin. Like many texts throughout early civilization, they were as spread out as they were rare. Of course, most early written works being adapted from spoken words, hence spells. Before writing, we as a species mostly spread information through verbal communication, and supposedly our memories were much better, even better than they were before the internet. Thus, the incantations would have been dispersed through the south of Lebanon and or Syria before being written in Egyptian hieroglyphs thousands of years before the first Necronomicon Ex Mortis. Imhotep, the antagonist of the mummy mythologies, is a Deadite, but also was a historical figure in history. He was an architect of one of the first Egyptian step pyramids. That's all we really know about him. It was two words, 4 symbols on the first step of the pyramid, and 100 years later or so was blown up into this demigod mythology over the course of the next 2,000 years after he died. Just goes to show you mythology hasn't changed like many things. Thousands of years ago, I would have been this mad, rambling scribe just drawing connections and bullshitting about some gods no one cared about. So, lastly, I've got some miscellaneous mentions here. Apparently, there's been a run of undead Archie comics in which the Necronomicon kicks the events off in that. I hope they crossed over with Sabrina. That'd be pretty cool. It was referenced in a Crichton book, but didn't really have anything to do with the plot of the book. That was a waste of a read. Video games like Crusader Kings, which I've never heard of, features Necronomicon prominently. A modern English version was in a House episode. I got to look that House episode up and just watch that. Also, fun fact, House was based on Sherlock Holmes. He's supposed to be like the medical Sherlock Holmes. Look it up. There's the works of H.R. Geiger, entitled Necronomicon 1 through 5, art collections of these beautiful techno-satanic prints. If you're not familiar with the works of H.R. Geiger, they are the inspiration for the art style of, and canonized as being interpretations of, the stories throughout the Alien franchise. Also, I think it'd be really cool if someone did like a Doctor Doom in like the H.R. Geiger style. That'd be awesome. Like, you know, the guy who becomes Doom, Victor Von or whatever, he gets, you know, pulled to this dimension of H.R. Geiger shit, and it like downloads into him and comes back. Like that'd be cool shit. Hit me up, Marvel. I got some ideas. So I would be remiss not to mention the collection of Evil Dead media, but my associate AC curated that on his channel, so check that out on his Media Mash. He did a whole thing about the Evil Dead timeline. A link to that will be embedded in the description for this video. As always, if I missed anything important, let me know in the comments below. Also, like, subscribe, and stay snide.